Thursday,
Happy
everyone.
Thursday or Friday Eve, as I like to call it.
Yes. My name is Julian. This is Kiersten. We are Rich and Regular and the Money Editors for Success. We do these webinars every month. This, I believe, is our third or our fourth. Don't quote me
I
on
think it's
that.
the third,
Maybe it's the third.
which
Okay.
means it is also the charm. So this one should be our good one.
Perfect. I see we've got a couple of people in the room. I do want to do a quick sound check because I know that was a bit of an issue the last time, but it sounds like everything is going good. Today, or with this particular webinar, we are going to talk about something that we really love because it's an overlooked and very quirky and often misunderstood financial topic, and it is saving for college. When our son was born in 2017, I was so excited about starting a 529 plan. Between that and cooking his food so that I could develop his palate, for some reason, those were the two things that I was really excited about doing. And the reason for that, the college savings aspect of it, was because of my own experience in college. In undergrad, I remember working nights and weekends to help pay for my way through college. And even in graduate school, I went to the extent of actually working at the college just to make the experience a little bit more affordable. And so I was able to get essentially an employee discount, which is what enabled me to earn my master's degree. And it was a great experience. I obviously learned a lot. It helped to hone my work ethic. But if I'm being honest, looking back, it drained a lot of energy for me. I was not able to fully pour myself into the collegiate experience, particularly extracurricular activities. And I know that my career probably would have gone a little bit differently if I had a wider network of people that I could reach out to, or just a wider set of experience that I'd pressure tested in college. And so when I think about my own child, even though we've got a good bit of ways before he's even ready for college, I really want to make sure that I can help to lighten, or best case scenario, eliminate the financial burden so that he can make the most out of his own experience there. I know Kiersten's experience in college was a little bit different. So
Yeah, my experience was definitely different. My parents are first generation college grads, and so they instilled college in us from a very young age. They actually started savings accounts for us when we were in elementary school, so that we knew that they were saving for our college. And it wasn't a lot of money. It was $50 here, $100 here. But by the time we were, college ready, it was helpful. And so their commitment to us was that they would take care of it. They would do that if we did our job. And our job was to make sure that we were good students and that we worked hard, and where we could found ways to lower the costs. And so the last 2 years of high school, I was on the scholarship hustle plan. And so I was applying to a lot of different scholarships, doing all of the test prep for SATs, PSATs to make sure that I was eligible. As a senior, I enrolled in a dual enrollment program so that I could get credits towards college for free, and that allowed me to graduate a year early. And so it was a very different approach, but we were still trying to accomplish the same thing, which was to lower the cost. When I got to college, I was working to make sure I wouldn't, burden my parents with any additional expenses. And so it's definitely something that we contributed to in different ways, and that we want to think about when we think about how we're raising our son and how we want to help him cover the same costs.
yeah, so a couple of things before we jump into it that are related. So in addition to working with Success, we also work with Next Advisor. Next Advisor is a media platform that's a subsidiary of Time Magazine, and it is predominantly focused on personal finance, and so we're contributors to that as well. About a week ago, while we were celebrating Father's Day, I actually wrote an article that documented and shared some of my own personal experience. And so we're going to leave a link for that if anyone is interested. But in that article, we also talk about what we're going to talk about today, 529 plans. The second one is next week, Tuesday, I believe, Tuesday the 29th. We're actually going to be co-hosting another webinar that's going to go in a little bit more detail. And we're partnering with Kiplinger. We are partnering with the Capital Group. And if you're a football fan, you'll be really excited about this. The Atlanta Falcons linebacker, one of the newest linebackers, Brandon Copeland. So when he's not tackling people for a living and helping to wrap up W's for our local squad, he is also an advocate for financial literacy. Literally, he teaches a class on financial literacy and financial wellness at the University of Pennsylvania. And so we'll be partnering with him on a webinar to talk in more detail about 529 plans. And so look out for that link as well. We will share that in the Success Achievers community. It's free for you to sign up. All right, so let's start with what a 529 plan is. Make sure we're good here. Okay, so what is a 529 plan? Or some people call it a 529 plan. It doesn't matter. Like most codes that are the alphabet soup or alphanumeric soup of financial planning, it is called 529 because of the Internal Revenue Code. And so that is the
IRS code.
The IRS code that is dedicated to these types of college savings plans. And so the plan itself is essentially named after that. So that's where the name comes from. The purpose of those plans are basically to give you an incentive to save in advance for college or qualified expenses. And so contributions to a 529 plan are deductible from federal tax. But more importantly, as they grow and compound over time, the withdrawals for those from those accounts, which are used for qualified educational expenses, are also tax-free. And so this gives you an opportunity to really save and plan in advance and help to lower, or in some cases, eliminate the cost of college altogether. Now, we mentioned federal taxes, but there's a state tax implication here as well. And so state taxes often, or some of them, I should say, some of the 529 plans offer a state tax deduction as well. But this is where things get a little tricky.
Harry.
And so I want to make sure we go through some of these things. Each 529 plan is different based on the state. And so Texas is going to have a different state-sponsored 529 plan from Georgia. Georgia is going to have a different state 529 plan from Florida. And then it gets a little bit more complicated. And so you don't have to invest in a 529 plan just because you live in that state. And so we live in Georgia. We are not restricted to only investing or taking advantage of the Georgia 529 plan. We can choose to invest in a Texas plan or any of the other states. It's entirely up to us. It's entirely up to you. So why would somebody want to do that? There are any number of reasons why you would want to do that. It could be because you're planning to live in that state. And so you just tend to favor and want to support things that are happening in that state. It could be that particular state or that particular plan has more favorable investment options, things that are more in line with your investment strategy or any of those types of details. It could be that you have political reasons. As I'm looking at some of my notes here, it could be for political reasons. You are not in favor of supporting a particular state. The point is, you have the option to do that and to invest in plans, whether they are within your state or outside of your state.
There's a question that says, does that mean the child needs to attend the school in that state? And the answer is no.
No.
Your child does not have to attend school in the state that you invest in a 529. All right, let's talk qualified expenses. So when these plans were first introduced, they were pretty much referred to as college savings plans. And you can kind of hear us refer to them as saving for college because it's kind of ingrained in how we talk about them. But in recent years, a few things have happened. The first is that contribution limits have increased, and that makes sense given how rapidly the cost of college education is increased. But secondly, and probably more importantly, these accounts can now be used to fund educational expenses K through 12. So you don't have to wait until your child is in college to start using your 529 or start withdrawing from your 529. However, the withdrawals for K through 12 education is limited to $10,000 per year. Specifically around qualified expenses, qualified education expenses include tuition and mandatory fees. So if you have a child that may attend some sort of private school or daycare situation during the summer, and they go to public school during the regular school year, it would qualify for 529 expenses. Textbooks, computers, software. So if you were impacted by virtual learning and you had a 529, if you had to buy a computer and you had a 529, you could have used the funds to purchase a computer. Supplies, required equipment, Room and board, if you're enrolled in college at least half the time. Now, room and board costs may not exceed certain amounts, so there is a cap. You can't just go, get an MTV Cribs using your 529 amount. It has to be either the actual invoiced cost of living on campus, or if you're off campus, the applicable rate determined by your qualified college or institution. The other thing that 529 services can cover is special needs services for any special needs beneficiary, which is also considered a qualified expense. So this is great for a lot of Americans because saving for future college expenses is a huge source of stress. And even before college, there are a number of us that may choose to do a private education or a different type of education for your students as opposed to the public school system. And this allows you to kind of alleviate some of that cost and plan for it and save in a way that grows.
Okay, so 529 plans, just kind of based, just looking at the qualified expenses alone. And then you talk about the state by state differences. Like, it is incredibly complicated. And so we're not going to address all of the nitty gritty details here. This is really just to help answer some of the basic questions or introduce these types of plans to you, and then sort of focus on a bit of the highlights. And so a couple other things that make these plans interesting or quirky, but just make sure that we cover a couple of these things here. So unlike a retirement plan, which I think the vast majority of people, especially if you are participants in an employer-sponsored 401k, are likely more familiar with those. And because of that, it shapes the way that we think about investment plans. And so you may be thinking along the lines of, all right, well, I'm going to put money in there, and assuming I'm planning on working, let's say 30 to 40 years, I'm going to have around 30 to 40 years for that money to grow. But if you think about the purpose of a 529 plan, you don't have 40 years unless you're planning far in advance for a child that you haven't even given birth to or adopted. You don't have a 40-year time frame. You're typically looking at ideally 18, 20 years before you can actually use those. And so that means that the way that you choose your investments and the objectives of those investments are different. Ideally, we're looking to maximize value over a 20-year horizon in most cases, instead of, let's say, a 30 or 40-year horizon. Now, to Kiersten's point, if you're planning on using these for K through 12 expenses, well, then you've got an even shorter time frame. And I think that's part of the reason. There are many, but it's part of the reason why a lot of people don't focus on this type of plan, because it kind of feels like, well, I'm saving for the future, but I'm not really saving for the future because I might as well just put that money somewhere else, right, or save it in cash. And so you can see where people get a little bit confused or are dissuaded from investing in these types of plans. But wanted to make sure that we call that out. One of the ways that you can solve for that, and one of the ways that a lot of 529 plans and brokerage firms solve for that, is through what they call target date funds. And you may have seen that in your investment portfolio as well. Let's say you're planning on retiring in 2060. You may be able to go into your 401k plan, or even working with a financial advisor, and select a fund or a target date fund that is essentially one that is focused on optimizing its value at that particular time frame. Some of them even get really, really specific. If you have a child that is literally going to be, based on their age, the class of, let's say, 2041, well, then they can create a target date fund that is organized and balanced and structured in a way that optimizes its value based on that time period. And that's important because you don't want to be at the middle of, let's say, an economic downturn, and then the total value or a significant chunk of the value of your fund is essentially eaten up by, let's say, losses or downturns in the stock market. And so these funds are designed in a way to factor that in mind. And as a result, the way that they are allocated and balanced is going to be a little different from the way that your investment portfolio. Right. You might be much more interested, or your financial advisor or brokerage firm might say, well, ignore this downturn because we're not touching this money for another 20 years. But you wouldn't factor that in. You would readjust that because you're dealing with a significantly shorter time frame. The second thing that I think is interesting about this, or is something to consider, is what if your child decides that a 4-year college isn't for them? None of us can really predict the future. We don't know what our child's skill set or where their zone of genius will be. But you do have the flexibility with 529 plans to not just use them for expenses at a 4-year college. You can use it for a trade school. You can use it for a vocational program. Basically, so long as the institution that they are attending can receive federal financial aid, and they are granted that sort of qualification from the Department of Education, then they are basically a qualified institution. If we created a course and it was educational, you would not be able to use the 529 funds, even though you are learning to use that, right? So that's not the type of program. We're talking about institutions that have certifications and qualifications and those things. And so it's not just 4-year schools. You've got 2-year vocational and trade schools as well. Which leads me to the next thing. Well, what if my child doesn't want to do any of those things? And, that happens. Not college isn't for everyone. And in that case, you can still access the funds. It's not like you've invested it. You can only use it for educational expenses, but you will have to pay a fee. And I want to say that fee is around 10%. And so whatever the total value of your fund is, you basically will have access to relinquish those funds, and hopefully you put that to a better use or a better alternative reinvest it, whatever it is. But you would have to essentially shave off 10%, and that would essentially be a penalty for not using those funds to go towards qualified educational expenses. Sorry, one last thing here. Given the active management, we've been talking about, dealing with funds that have a shorter time frame. This essentially means that there's someone managing these funds. And typically, if you're working with a financial advisor, you've got someone that's managing those funds anyway. But because of that, these funds are actively managed. There's a cost associated to that. And this tends to be another reason why people are a little bit more hesitant to invest in 529s, because they're not the cheapest available investment options that are out there, but they are still really, really good. There are some benefits, and we just wanted to make sure that you guys were aware of both the pros and the cons.
All right. So one more unique feature or quirky feature, whatever you want to call it.
A good quirky feature.
A good quirky. That's probably my favorite, is that anyone can make a contribution to a 529 plan. So each fund is set up, for example, with you as the parent and your child as the beneficiary, but your friends and family can all be contributors. And so where I'm from, we have this phrase that says it takes a village. I'm sure that's not just unique to where I'm from. Y'all have probably heard the phrase, it takes a village. But this is one of those good examples where you can put your village to work. You can lean on your village to pitch in, and you can all kind of contribute to your child's education. So imagine a world where a birthday is coming up, and instead of you sending out a list that has all these clothes and toys and all the additional things that your child may have their eye on and eventually get bored with, you and your closest friends and family all contribute, $25, $50 to this 529. And a lot of the plans make it very easy for you to do that. They'll create little links for you, very similar to, GoFundMe or any of these other online fundraisers, where you can just send that out in the bottom of your invitation or in an email and make it an annual tradition. I know for our son, when he received checks as, a baby, he's 4 now. He's still kind of a baby. He's my baby. He's 4 now. But as he was receiving checks for his birthday and for Christmas, when he was younger, we would take those and we would contribute them to his 529. It was, kind of redirecting that fund instead of buying things. And so when the child is ready to go to college or pursue higher education, or maybe they get into a amazing school for high school, you have that story to tell them that, your friends and family all believe in you and have invested in your future. And that's how we're able to do this for you. So that's my favorite part of a 529, other than the fact that it is investable and tax advantage, is that it can also be, a gift. It can be contributed to by a lot of people.
Yeah, and that gift is tax deductible, right? So there is a financial benefit for the grandparents, aunts, uncles, friends, you name it. And so, I'm a big believer of that. I'm a big fan of that, particularly because I try to be minimalist. I don't like to just continue to just buy things, especially for our kid, because, you buy clothes, they outgrow the clothes. You buy toys, maybe they get bored with it a couple of months. But we're talking about being able to front load in many ways, or invest in a child's future and really, really help to cement a legacy, or in some cases, really change the trajectory of an entire family or community. And so those are all things that, I get really, really excited about. And I think a lot of people get excited about those things too. And so that is about it. There's a lot more in terms of 529 plans, in terms of tax implications. Obviously, we're talking about state by state plans. We're not going to go state by state and talk about what some of those differences are, but essentially they're going to be the funds that are available and the contribution limits, meaning is it 2,000, is it 4,000 that you can make, and whether or not those are state tax deductible in addition to the federal tax deduction or not. So those are in general going to be the differences state by state. There are tons of articles about this, tons of information about these types of accounts online. If you have a financial advisor, I would highly recommend you mention it to them and say, hey, I know we may have these plans or these programs or port funds, whatever it is, but I'm wondering if we can go ahead and start a 529 plan as well. You don't have to contribute to it every single year.
Right.
You don't have to do a little bit by month. You can do, let's say, whichever those months are where you get an extra check or you've got windfall money that's coming in. You can use that for your 529. But I like the idea of having it, and this is in general for most funds, especially taxable accounts, but having these funds available, just open it. You can have the balance at zero, but at least when or if a raise comes in or additional money comes in or a tax refund that's larger than you expected, when you've got those funds essentially there available for you to do it, the likelihood of you actually contributing to them as opposed to then or first being motivated to open it the account, and then fund it, if you already have it open, and again, even if it's sitting at a zero, I think it's one of the absolute best things that you can do, especially if you have children and you're passionate about college education or a particular school, because a lot of families are hardcore UNC, they're really, really passionate about those kinds of things. And so if you really, really want to pass that on and create that sort of legacy and prepare for your child's college education, I think a 529 plan is a no-brainer account. And we wanted to make sure that we mention that to you guys. So as I said, when this is posted in the Success Achievers community, we're going to add another link. I believe they've added the first link to the Next Advisor article, but we'll go ahead and add another link so that you guys, if you're interested, want to join that additional webinar to learn a little bit more details from Kiplinger and Brandon Copeland and us. Capital Group.
Capital Group. Sorry.
But I think that's it for us. We're going to wrap this up. This was great. We've switched it up a little bit. We've got a different background here, and our Wi-Fi stayed stable.
Yes.
The guys did not come blowing leaves, and
the mic stayed on.
The mic stayed on. No major technical difficulties, and so that's
true what they say. Third time's a charm.
Third time's a charm. Perfect.
All right, guys. We'll see you next month, and in the Achievers community.